I wonder how many of you, maybe now or in the past, have owned a hi-fi system with the predominant number of the components being from one manufacturer. And if you have, how did you feel about that system? Do you feel there was a more obvious system synergy going on? Now, there's no need to leave your answer below in the comment section. Maybe just hold that thought, because that has been the situation for me for this review. And I definitely think there is something in it. I have been reviewing the Chord Electronics ULTIMA PRE 3 preamplifier with the Chord Electronics ULTIMA 6 stereo power amplifier that you can see on the rack there behind me. And some people might see these as Chord's entry level or entry point into their ULTIMA range of products. But it's not really, because the Etude power amplifier that I reviewed a couple of years ago is the most affordable way into Chord's ULTIMA power amplifier technology. But the Etude is a small form factor type of amplifier, and you can see that the ULTIMA 6 behind me is definitely not. These are definitely, full size components, and there has to be some, I'm sure, some technical performance potential benefits to being larger. And I think we should definitely start with the visuals, because I know there will be some audiophiles that won't like these because they are not traditional enough for them. And I think you could maybe describe the chords as flashy, or maybe just striking is a better word. But one thing that impressed me was when I looked over the units with a fine tooth comb, the solid aluminium chassis build quality is exemplary. And there is a lot of aluminium here and a lot of aluminium sculpting and shapes. And some of the things that I really like about the designs, one is the internal illuminated blue LEDs and how that lets you see just a little bit better through the beautifully sculpted top plates. And these are top plates that are rivaling high-end Luxman for their luxurious build quality. Just lovely. Another nice touch with the ULTIMA 6 power amplifier is what I'm going to call the Iron Man arc reactor like chest piece on the front. Because when you dim the lights, the LED sphere illuminates the surrounding cutout and it glows just lovely. And I'm not sure if I'll be able to get this on camera or make it look how it does in the flesh, but trust me, it's just a lovely touch of detail that makes a difference. Another nice touch is that the LEDs on the amplifier are dimmable with a hidden switch that you would never know is there. But if you take a credit card or similar, you can adjust the brightness for the amplifier. And I don't know why, I just love the way Chord have done this. And you can adjust the brightness of the preamplifier using the remote control, which is much more convenient, but maybe a little less special. Turning the units around, I can't help but like the quality of the connections that's used here and the fact that there are not loads of them. There is just enough, about perfect really. I think one thing to point out with the Pre 3 is the USB socket on the rear is not for connecting any source components to. It's just a power connection for maybe powering a Chord Qtist or a Chord Hugo 2 DAC, but you could power anything from it that takes 5 volts up to 3 amps. So that's actually a lot of power, and this is just a nice convenience touch. But outside of that, the ULTIMA Pre 3 is just a preamplifier, and the ULTIMA 6 is just a stereo power amplifier. So no headphone amplifiers, no DACs, no streamers. You get the idea. But there are a couple of quirky things to mention here. With the Pre 3, I really like the front plate design, including the symmetry of the knobs and how they feel in use. And I also like the color change that indicates the input that's being used. The knob on the right is for balance and engaging the AV bypass. And maybe I'm being a little picky, or maybe I'm just a little bit stupid, but there wasn't really any obvious center for the balance. No donk as you hit the center, which definitely would have helped me with my OCD. Then with the ULTIMA 6 amplifier, Chord have used a C19 style power input, which is not commonly used. So if you have invested in maybe some upmarket, upgraded, high-end power cables, well then maybe you would need to have one of them re-terminated, or maybe you would even need to buy a new one. You don't have to, of course, there's one included, but you possibly would want to if you're used to using those types of power cables. So this is not the end of the world, but definitely something to be mindful of. The Ultima 6 power amplifier is a Class AB design that uses 16 proprietary MOSFETs to deliver 180 watts per channel into 8 ohms, and it does run pretty warm, something else to point out. On the inside is Chord's own design of SMPS power supply that is something very different for an amplifier. And also the amplifier uses Chord's own dual feed forward Ultima topology that I won't pretend that I understand to be able to explain it to you. And the Ultima 6 costs £7,500. The Ultima Pre 3 also uses a custom Chord SMPS power supply, a Blue Velvet Alps potentiometer, some advanced screening and more. And it costs £6,000. So this pre and power pairing costs £13,500, which is a lot of hi-fi money. But does it justify that price tag with its sound quality? I have had a number of very high-end amplifier setups here recently to review, and none of them have made the same mark on me as this Chord Pre and Power has, but it definitely wasn't like that for me straight away. And I started my listening testing using the Chord Duo with my current reference speakers, the Mission 770, and I was surprised the chords didn't sound like how I expected them to. I was expecting quite an analytical sound, but instead the Mission sounded lively, bold and warm, and I liked that. But to be honest, I only listened for about half a day because I had always planned to combine this with the review of the Bowers 803D4. And listening to the exact same system through the Bowers, things were totally different. And there was lots of good things happening individually, but the overall cohesive whole of the sound just felt disjointed to me. The treble felt disjointed from the mids and from the bass. So of course I had to spend some time with, speaker positioning in the room and towing, and this did not solve it. But then I remembered one of the superpowers of the Chord Electronics Hugo TT2 DAC, its different filter modes. And engaging filter mode 4 was like flipping the switch, it just brought the whole sound into balance. Bass first, underpinning the mids much better, and it eased off the treble to bring it into balance. And now I could just get on enjoying the system across a very wide range of music. And the first big positive that jumped out to me was the scale of the system's sound, with its perception of extended dynamic range. And this is a hard one to try and explain, but I mean treble details that extend up to being almost ceiling height at times, with a good solid bass that's obviously extended. And of course, in large part, this is a Bowers speakers thing, but I also found out later it's definitely a system thing too. And I will admit, this took some getting used to, especially the extra energy that was living in the higher frequencies, kind of up here, up in the top, the high part of the soundstage. But once I'd gotten used to it, trust me, if that then goes away, it's definitely something that you miss. With the second positive that stood out to me was the speed and dynamics. Now, speed is often associated with timing, which goes hand in hand with clarity, and the chord pairing has exceptionally good timing, even when the music is densely packed together like it can be with a lot of modern music. But to be honest, I kind of expected this from a Chord Electronics, pre and power setup anyway. So that wasn't the bit that really stood out to me. The bit that stood out to me was the dynamic shifts. The way the music was able to go from maybe quiet or small to big, to bigger, to bigger still, fully staying composed, and the shift in the dynamics was so fast and so smoothly delivered that I kind of took it for granted. But I shouldn't really take it for granted, because it's definitely not something that every amplifier setup is able to do. Not like this Chord Pre. The way it shifts so quickly from quiet to loud or from small to big, it really is very, very impressive. The next standout thing to me was the full soundscape the chord duo with the Bowers 803 created, with at times the music sounding nicely beyond the speakers, which is always impressive to hear, especially in a smaller listening room. But sometimes the music was simultaneously going beyond the speakers, and also other parts of the music was out in the room at the same time. So it was creating a very overall three-dimensional soundstage. Of course, not all music does this, but occasionally, I would find a track that demonstrated this. Now, other tracks would, just present music that's out into the room. So details were presented to my left and to my right, big scale, and other times they was presented at height to the left and to the right. Of course, this is not all the time, but it's sometimes there. It's sometimes in music. And when it's delivered so well, when it's delivered so cleanly, when it's delivered, in a way that feels a very natural part of the way that music is supposed to be presented, it's not something that I get all the time in this room. It's not something that I hear from all speaker and amplifier types of setup. So of course, when it's there so clearly, so well delivered, you can't help but be impressed. The next standout thing for me, again with some music, not all music, was the wonderful sense of scale of an instrument. And I'm thinking of some piano in some Tingval Trio music that I was listening to, but I'm really thinking about the song with the harp in the cliche audiophile album Chasing the Dragon, which I'm sure most of you probably own. There's a track, I think it's track 3, where there's a harp being played. The scale of that harp was super impressive, combined with the dynamics of the intricacy of the fingers plucking the strings. I've listened to that song a lot on a lot of different systems, not so much recently, and I think this is the most impressive that song has been presented to me in this room before. But it wasn't just audiophile cliche albums that were sounding impressive. Rock music with drums was sounding really very good, brass instruments too, and so on. So the next standout thing for me was the bass, because we all know Bowers 800 range of speakers are notoriously more difficult speakers to drive and generally prefer a lot of amplifier power. And I also found them quite finicky for their placement in my room. But once I'd found the right inch, literally the right inch, the Ultima 6 was able to drive them really well, keeping the bass tight and controlled while still being really punchy. Kick drums sounding really very authentic, even at the ASBO high volume levels that I listen at. And also, in some of the modern music that I listen to, there is supposed to be like a bass pressure that kind of sits itself on you. And I always like it because it makes me feel warm. I just like the feeling of the bass pressure sitting on me. And that delivery from the Bowers with the chord pairing was really good. That bass pressure was really nice and tight and controlled, but sitting itself on me. I will admit, not in a very good subwoofer type of way, but still very, very satisfying. And I like a lot of bass. I really like that feeling when I listen to that types of music. And like I say, it's extremely satisfying from this setup, especially in the way that bass was also able to stay tight and controlled and be, detailed in a sense, bass over there, bass down here as part of the music's delivery. And at times, when bass does that, it feels like it kind of dances around in front of you, which again is really impressive. There was not an ounce of bloat on the bass at all, really, with maybe the exception of very deep bass notes. I think I could hear where very deep bass notes were not delivered quite as cleanly or with quite the same composure as maybe the rest. But how much of that is my smaller listening room? Probably some. So overall, from the system, I was getting a very lively, energetic, big scale dynamic sound with good tone, lively but clean clear treble and clean clear vocals, with an excellent overall 3D soundstage that's densely packed with information but still open and spacious, extending nicely in all directions, especially upwards. So overall, I was very impressed. But what about some negatives? And I'm struggling really to think of any negatives that are worthy of note outside of maybe the chord duo's intended design character. But I can say it's definitely not an overly warm or kind of lush or soft or sultry sounding setup, which does mean that vocals don't necessarily come across as maybe warm and sultry and kind of deep and bold and rich as maybe with some other systems. However, that will likely be speaker dependent. So if you want really lush, warm vocals, and then maybe you would need to find that from the speakers or maybe something else in the system. And also I think that the chord pairing definitely comes over as a more forward type of presentation, again compared to some others. And I think it would be possible with the right speakers for it to sound too forward in the mids and highs, like what I was experiencing at first with the Bowers and Wilkins. But I don't know if that's necessarily a fair criticism, but I definitely think it's, you know, a point worthy of note. So far, I have been looking at the Ultimas as a pairing, but they are available to purchase separately. So what are they like individually? I started by swapping out the Pre 3 for the bespoke audio passive preamplifier that I reviewed a couple of weeks ago. And I know this passive preamplifier has no sound of its own, so it's ideal to use for a test. And it was interesting because straight away I could hear there was a more rounded sound to the music's presentation, and it was more graceful, relaxed and smooth without losing the music's energy. And I like that. And I also think the treble was slightly softer, more relaxed, and there was more subtlety to treble details rather than there being just more of a solid sound. And I also think the sound felt a little bit further back in terms of the perceived soundstage depth, which is also, of course, a positive. But the system sound had definitely lost some of its very, very tight focus. And I also think there was less bite, obviously, to the treble, as I mentioned, but also a bit less impact, a little bit less purposefulness to the bass. And I definitely found myself missing that, actually, that little bit more excitement at the extreme ends of the sound. So my takeaway from this was that the Pre 3 for the money is an excellent preamplifier that seems to bring things out of the Ultima 6 power amplifier, and it does this with maybe a little loss in treble resolution in favour of a bit more treble bite. But these are differences that, of course, are only really readily apparent when you do A/B comparisons like this. You probably wouldn't notice it otherwise. But I do think another takeaway would be that the passive preamplifier, with its slightly more graceful treble, would be a bit more forgiving to certain types of music, where I feel like the Chord Pre 3 would make you very aware if, you know, music's mixed hot in the treble. But we also have to remember that the bespoke preamplifier costs 3 times as much as the Chord preamplifier. And I actually still think that, yes, there was, you know, some pros to the passive preamplifier, but as an overall sound, as an overall system synergy, I think the Chord Pre works best with the Chord Power. And then it was time to change out the Ultima 6 power amplifier for what I had been calling the expensive amplifier's nemesis, the NAD M23, which I thought was a nigh on perfect amplifier. But interestingly, with a demanding load like the Bowers 803D4, these speakers really do show the amplifier men from the boys, because the NAD sounded choked by comparison and not really powerful enough to bring out the full scale, the dynamics and energy to the music that the Chord Ultima 6 was. But I do need to be careful here, because the NAD still sounded very good, and I would say that it was a slightly warmer sound, which made vocals sound slightly warmer too. But we're talking like a small difference there, but it definitely wasn't enough of a difference, for me at least, to compensate for the best bits that were really missing: the energy, the liveliness, the dynamism, the way that music would just really shift and really kind of come out of the speakers with a lot of, you know, expressive energy. The NAD M23 sounded really quite subdued by comparison, and I definitely was not expecting that. But let's not forget that the Ultima 6 costs twice as much as the NAD M23, which means you could have 2 M23s and run them as monoblock amplifiers, which of course doubles the power, etc. But even so, I still think the Chord Pre, from a system synergy point of view, would just balance better with the Chord Power. And it was these listening comparisons with very good alternative hi-fi products that really showed to me just how accomplished this Chord Pre and Power setup is as a duo. Really, it's stunningly good, actually, and I don't really know what else to say about it other than that. And as a reviewer, I generally try and break, you know, the sound down into these little digestible pieces, but that's not really how we listen to music, is it? And interestingly, on the final day of this review, I was shooting a lot of the B-roll that you've been seeing, and I had the system playing while I was doing that, and I was using the radio function of my music stream app, and it was just obviously playing music at random. And when song after song after song comes on, and you just get an uplifted feeling. Wow, this is a great song. Wow, this is a banger. You know, turn it up a little bit more. When music gives you that feeling, it makes you connect with it emotionally. Sounds really cheesy, but it kind of makes you want to get up and dance a little bit. So I think the knock-on effect is when a hi-fi system has that ability to make, lots of music sound that uplifting and that fun and enjoyable to listen to, I think you create an obviously stronger emotional connection to that hi-fi system. And surely that it really is what it's all about. Not, little tiny little details. It's the overall whole really is what makes, I think, the difference. And that is why I think I said that at the start of this video, it's the overall cohesive whole of the whole chord setup from the the Hugo M scaler, the TT2 DAC, and then through the Ultima Pre 3 and then the Ultima 6 power amplifier. The combination of that, the overall synergy of that, is the first time I've ever been able to really properly listen to it. And of course, how that then balances with the Bowers and the setup and everything else. Yeah, it's really been a very enjoyable review, this one. It's really made a mark on me. But I know this chord setup won't be for everyone, because it's not hi-fi trying to make music sound romantic or overly pleasing. It's about making music sound lively, dynamic and expressive through its energetic honesty. And that does mean music is quite an active listen, more than a sit back, relaxed, pipe and slippers listen. I suppose the bit that's made its mark on me has been the energy, it's been the dynamism or the dynamics, I suppose, of the system. And it's not the big stuff I'm really talking about, it's the small stuff. It's the combination of lots of the small things in the music having that extra level of dynamism that makes the music really want to pop off the background and really get out of the speakers and, I suppose, energize itself and energize you. And of course, when it's relaxed, laid back music, it sounds relaxed and laid back. The system can do that as well, but it's when music's supposed to be lively and energetic. And I think that is where, when there's a hi-fi system with an overly soft and sultry sound, they don't always have the ability to give you the get up and go like this type of sound, this intended sound, this overall, design of hi-fi does. So yeah, it's been a really good review. I've really enjoyed my time with this system, and I've really longed out the breaking down of it as much as possible. So I hope you've enjoyed this review anyway. I hope it's been, an enjoyable, useful review for you. If you've enjoyed it, please hit the thumbs up button. And if you enjoy my take on hi-fi reviewing in general, then please consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you very much for watching.